Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Lou Lessard, and welcome to the Dream Vision 7 Network's YouTube live channel. And like I said, I'm Lou Lessard, and I'm the host of the Power of Forgiveness show on the Dream Vision 7 radio network. And I'm very excited to be doing my first YouTube live video for the station. And the topic of today is, guess what? We're going to talk about some forgiveness stuff and see how it goes. And feel free to jump in. And if you have any questions, I'll open up the chat window here so I can see. And so it's what, November 30th, 2017. So that means we are coming into the thick of the holiday season. So no matter what your religious background is, your cultural background is, nowadays in this modern connected world, it's really hard to escape the holiday season and the stress and the strain and all that that means for us and our families. And this has been coming up a lot for me, for people that I work with, for people I talk to, whether it's at the gym, around town, wherever. Just how much this affects us, because we've got all the stuff going on at work. A lot of us have end of the year deadlines going on. We have a shortened month because a lot of businesses towards the end of the month close down or have limited hours, limited staff. A lot of businesses, if you're in retail or in manufacturing or shipping, this is the time of year where you need to get it done, because the end of the month, it's too late. You need the income now. And then we have our families. So we just came out of Thanksgiving here in the US. Thanksgiving is one of our big holidays, and it's a big family holiday. And that's really what I wanted to focus in on to start the show anyway, was how we have our families can add a whole new dimensions to what's going on in our lives, emotionally and psychologically, not to mention physically. Because a lot of times we're traveling, could be we're driving across town, could be driving, like my mother lives 2 hours away from me. So on the holidays, I have to drive 2 hours with my family. Sometimes we're flying cross countries, cross oceans, you name it. But the big thing is, when we're around our families, a lot of our stuff starts to surface. It's our relationships with our significant others, with our children, with our families, that I think really test us. And you add in all the other things that are going on this time of year, and it's a recipe for a lot of struggle and strain. At least that's what I've found. So why is that? So we have a lot of things, that, traditional psychological models, we talk a lot about, things that have happened to us in our childhoods, from our moms and our dads. And I think we'll have time, I'll get into a couple stories in a little while about, some of the things that happened for me, in my childhood, that set me up for some patterns in my relationships as I got older. And so we have all that stuff. But also, one of the things, if you listen to my radio show, which is every Monday at 5 a.m. and 5 p.m., by the way, on the Dream Vision 7 radio network, I talk a lot also about our lineage and our generational traumas and how they get passed down from generation to generation. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about how, if, say, my grandmother, had something traumatic happen to her, and it was unresolved. In her DNA, the way our brains and everything are wired, certain things were turned on so that she could survive the trauma. And what ends up happening And there's people that are doing studies on this. And I had a guest on my show a few months ago who's written a book on this, on a lot of these things. His name is Mark Wolin. And actually I had the book, I took it out. And he wrote a book that's getting a lot of awards and getting a lot of attention called It Didn't Start With You. And what it basically is, the whole thing is he shares a lot about his journey, but he's starting to show, or in the book he shows how science is starting to prove that a lot of the traumas that we deal with, a lot of the triggers and a lot of the emotional and psychological things that we struggle with didn't start with us. It could have started with our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents. We don't know personally, but oftentimes we spend a good portion of our lives, trying to look at ourselves and figure it out. And it didn't even really have anything to do with us personally, but we're the lucky ones that inherited it. And if we don't resolve it, guess what? Our children get the gift as well, so we all get to deal with it. And I thought I did this when I talked about it one of the weeks on the radio show. I was just curious, how many people influence us genetically. So if I'm one, if I start with myself, and I know I had a mother and a father, and every one of you has a mother and a father, I guarantee you do. Whether you know who they are or not, you have a mother and a father. So that's, so if we go back, let's say 2 generations, our parents and us, that's 3 people in our personal tree, right? If we go back another generation to our grandparents, we add 4 more, so that's 7. And if we go back another generation, to our great-great-grandparents, goes 8, 16, and all the way back. And I did, being a former engineer, I had to make a spreadsheet and do the numbers. If you just go back 10 generations, only 10 generations, which isn't that far back in time, there's over 1,000. There's 1,023 people in our personal family tree. If you go back 20 generations, so that's just 20 generations, you are at just over 1 million people. What do you think the odds are? And go back a few generations, out of those thousands of people, how many people do you think in our family trees have had something traumatic happen to them in their lives? And you think back, you're going back, through, world wars, civil wars, you name it. But it could be things like losing a child, or a relationship breaking up. I mean, think of all the things in our lives personally that are very traumatic to us and stick with us, like sometimes we go through, counseling for years. We go through, you name it. My journey has taken me on many, many directions, from counseling to shamanism to, energy things to you name it. And where I ended up falling on all of this is that for me, of all the things I learned, of all the things I got exposed to, of all the people I worked with, the thing for me that personally was the most powerful and transformative way to move past traumas or triggers in my life and the lives of my ancestors, and that's something that I learned, later on, was forgiveness. And forgiveness is not something that I invented. It's not something that, this is something that's been talked about probably for as long as humans have been on this planet. All the great religions, the great sages and teachers and saints and you name it, the wise ones, the kahunas, the keepers of knowledge, whatever you want to call them, and whatever the tradition that we're looking at or you belong to, every one of them had that great teacher that talked about the importance of love and forgiveness and gratitude. And one of the things that, as I was kind of getting ready and thinking through on the show, what we want to talk about was the relationship between these three things and how they're all interconnected. So in order for me, if I want to love myself, but there's a part of me that can't forgive, say I can't forgive myself. How can I love myself if there's a part of me that I can't forgive? So there's a interdependence there. So we have to love ourselves enough to want to forgive ourselves, but we can't fully love ourselves unless we can forgive. And then gratitude comes in too, because gratitude, is that whole, it's like, if you're grateful, for me, gratitude is like the opposite of judgment. So if we're in judgment of ourselves, or if we're in judgment of other people, we're really unable to be in a place where we're feeling gratitude or love, or even maybe the ability to forgive them or ourselves. So we want to move out of those emotions of judgment and fear and anger, which are low vibration, negative things, and we all know that they affect us negatively. They affect our health, they affect our mental health, our spiritual health, our physical health, they affect our relationships, they affect our ability to create, our ability to be productive. All those things, they're all limited by these negative, denser emotions. And it's not until we can free ourselves from that we can move on and be happy with our lives. And that's where, this little visual that I was like, how do you do it? Like, you need to be able to be grateful and to forgive in order to love. But in order to be grateful and forgive, you got to be able to, love. They're all interconnected. And it all starts with awareness. That to me that's like, why are we here? It's, we're here for a lot of reasons, and I think everybody will have their own unique way of looking at it. But I think we're here, a big part of why we're here is to learn and to grow, for our spirits, our souls to experience things, to experience life. And we're not meant to be here. The purposes of us being here isn't to suffer needlessly and to suffer for no reason. Whatever suffering we go through, it's kind of self-imposed. But if we can look at it, in an attitude of love and forgiveness and gratitude, then we're able to kind of transform whatever discomfort or suffering or negativity that we perceive in our lives. If we can see what it is that it's showing us, and usually it's showing us an aspect of ourselves that we need to, release and let go of. Again, forgiveness to me, forgiveness, release. Forgiveness is release, and we can't get hung up on terms. Everything is energy. I like to look at everything as energy. So if I'm talking about forgiveness, what am I'm talking about releasing the energy behind the emotion. So if I'm feeling anger, I want to release that anger. And what is that anger? It's energy. It's energy stored up inside of me. It's an energy that's blocked. It's an energy. So when it comes up, when it comes forward, it's actually a blessing if we allow it to be, because it gives us an opportunity to let it go. And getting back to our families and why our families are such a potent catalyst for our growth. How's that? How's that for putting it in a positive way? Catalyst for our growth. It's because, one, our families know how to push our buttons better than anybody else because they've known us for a long time. Two, we share a lot of the same traits and wounds and traumas and behaviors. We share them, so we're looking at ourselves in the mirror, so we're all unique individuals, and we all deal with our things in a different way, in a unique way. But if I'm looking at my mother and I see my mother she struggles with being shy or something like that. Well, it's my mother, like my DNA came from her. Guess what? I'm part of her. She's part of me. So if that her being shy bothers me, that means that there's an aspect of me that is judging that part of myself. Because if there was no judgment, if there was nothing that I was hanging on to or bothering, it wouldn't bother me. There wouldn't be anything there. So it's really not about her being wrong in that example. And that's just an example I made up on the moment. She actually is quiet and shy, but it doesn't bother me at all. but there were some things, that did. And that, again, we'll have plenty of time to talk about some of that. So we look at ourselves, we see our families, and we're basically looking in the mirror, and we're seeing everything that bothers us in our families, and everything that bothers our family members and our loved ones about us is really, we're all just each mirroring all those things about ourselves that we don't like about ourselves, or that annoy us about ourselves, or something. And that's something that some of you, as you're listening to this, this isn't the first time you've heard it, and everybody's going to be on their own place on the spectrum of how that resonates with them. The first time I heard that, honestly, it didn't sound right to me. It didn't make sense to me. I just couldn't buy into it. I was like, no, that person's just annoying. Why on earth? That's not me. And it can mean different things, but the more and more I look at it, the older I get, the more work I do on myself, and the more honest I am with myself. It's really true. Every time I get upset, every time I get annoyed, every time I get triggered, it's because there's something in that emotion for me. That's just the way it goes. So I want to bring up a model. This is another really useful tool here. Let me put it on the clipboard. This is called the Kirkman drama triangle. And it was, I think it was developed back in the 70s by a Dr. Kirkman. And he actually makes it available for, people to use. And he does lectures, and he's done a lot of work with this, and he has a lot of modeling that he's done. I've actually looked into it a little bit after I was exposed to it a few months ago. But what this model shows us is this is the dynamic, basically. That for me, when I saw this, I was like going, wow, that's a pretty great visual way of seeing the dynamics that go on in our personal lives. And I think we all play different roles depending on the relationship or the timing with different people. Even with the same person, sometimes you can play different roles, like a husband and a wife. Sometimes it's the victim, and sometimes the wife's the victim, and it could be, depending on where you are and what you're doing and what's going on. But these roles, so what are they? It's basically a dysfunctional relationship, and it's dysfunctional in a way that every one of us experiences. It's part of being human. So the victim is the one, that feels powerless, helpless. They've been somebody has power over them. They can't, step into their creativity. Oh, poor me. You name it. There's a lot of ways, but I think we all know what a victim is. The rescuer, another way of looking at it would be the caretaker, not giver, caretaker. Because when you're a rescuer, you're basically enabling the victim. You're fooling yourself a lot of times into thinking that you are helping them, but you're really it's all about, in a lot of ways in this dysfunctional model, being a rescuer, it's about, you need to be needed, basically. Or if I'm being the rescuer, and trust me, I've been the rescuer a lot in my life. So it's why do we do that? Like why do we enable somebody to be the victim? Why do we have to constantly be rescuing people? It's because we need to be needed. I'll speak for myself. So we and sometimes the rescuer can be the perpetrator. So who's the perpetrator? The perpetrator is the one that makes the victim the victim. It doesn't necessarily mean, that they're a bad, terrible person, but in this model, so how many times have we been the victim when the person that we're blaming, as the perpetrator, didn't even really do anything? We just made them. We made them the bad guy. And sometimes we are the bad guy. Sometimes I've been the angry ogre. I've been the one that's been not kind. I've been the one that's said mean things to people. I've done it. I've been the receiver of it. I've been the one with the hurt feelings. So the victim, what's unhealthy about the victim in this model? The victim needs a rescuer. That's why it's dysfunctional. This isn't about, like, oh, I fell down and, somebody comes over and helps you stand up and puts a Band-Aid on your boo-boo, and enables you to go on the way. That's, like, helps you on your way. There's no, there's no dependency there. This is dependency. Oops. So the victim needs to be dependent on the rescuer. The rescuer needs to have a victim. There needs to be that codependence. The rescuer needs a perpetrator. Oftentimes, the same person can play the same role. So if I need to be needed, sometimes I would create the scenario where I would have to create somebody that needed me. So these are all, interesting tools, visual tools, for us to begin to understand, what's going on emotionally for us. And then, once we start to see and be honest, and this is where it gets hard. One of the early steps that get hard is when we start doing our own work, and it doesn't necessarily get easy, but it gets easier. It gets easier and easier as you go, because you start to see how your life changes, but you have to be honest with yourself. You have to be able to look at your relationships. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it with your family. Do it with yourself, but look and say, where have I been a victim? Where am I being the victim? Where am I being the rescuer, the caregiver, or the caretaker, not giver, right? So where am I being the perpetrator? Where am I being the bad guy? And in our families, we have these patterns, these behavioral patterns. So for a number of years, I would go out to visit my mother, and our dynamic was that I was both the rescuer and the perpetrator, and she was the victim. And we both played our roles. And I started to actually notice what was going on, and I wanted to try to change it. But guess what? She didn't want to. She wanted to be the victim. So she was able to, because we're family, right? She was able to push my buttons until I would say something and become the bad person. And then she would be the victim, and then I would have to be the good son, come in and help her and save her, right? That was our little dynamic. And maybe this is a good time to tell one of my stories about my mother. So that was our dynamic for a good portion of my life. And how did it all start? It started, for me, it started when I was young. And my father was a very angry, violent, you name it, person. I was the oldest son. I took the brunt of it. And then he left when I was young. I always remembered it as being 7, but my mother, my mother this year told me I was actually 9. So maybe I just lost 2 years in my memory or something. But point is that he left, and it left us all together. And it was not long after he left that I inherited the role of I was going to be the man of the house. And at 10, 11 years old, I wasn't quite ready for that job. So, and but and this is where our family lineage comes in. There are reasons why. It's not because she's a bad person. It's not because she was a bad mother. She was a wonderful, loving mother, but she had things go on, in her childhood that were unresolved. And guess what? My grandparents on her side and my father's side, they had lots of things, traumatic things happen to them, in their lives that were unresolved. So my mother was this collection and I was this collection, we're all this collection of all these wounds and stuff. So to make a long story short, I go through my teenage years, kind of with more responsibility than I necessarily was ready for or appreciated. And it wasn't until I was probably in my 30s that I started to actually acknowledge the fact that I resented that I was put in that role, like that a little bit of my childhood was kind of taken away or not allowed to kind of evolve naturally. So, then I was, let's see, I was in my mid 30s and I had my first son. And I started to notice, like a lot of things emotionally were coming up. And I really wanted to fix my relationship with my mother, as I was working on myself, so that I didn't have to repeat a lot of the things that were uncomfortable for me with my boys. And so the more I tried to change my dynamic with my mother, to make a long story short, was it always ended in epic failure. The more I didn't want to be the rescuer, the harder she tried to make me the rescuer. The more I didn't want to be the perpetrator, the more she pushed my buttons until I was the perpetrator. And, that's the joy of being in a family. That's the joy of these old patterns, and this is what got me ultimately. So there's always a gift in everything, isn't there? Ultimately, that's what led me down the path of forgiveness. And you might say to yourself, what the heck does that have to do with forgiveness? And how on earth could forgiveness fix all these psychological, emotional things? Well, I'll tell you, for me, so forgiveness for me it's been a journey, and it's going to be a journey, that I believe that it's, there's never going to be a lack of work there, because I'm not only doing forgiveness for myself. I'm doing forgiveness for everybody that I've hurt. I'm doing forgiveness for everybody that I've perceived has hurt me, and for all those people, and there's a formula there. And the formula that I arrived at, I'll mention Howard Wills, because I want to get to how he factors into this thing. I met Howard a couple years ago now on Kauai, and I'd been introduced to some forgiveness prayers that he had put out there that are free. They were on my website, www.loulessard.com, or they're on his. You can go directly to his website, www.howardwills.com. In my website, I have a link right to his, but you can go directly to him. So, but basically, he has a bunch of forgiveness prayers, and I was at the time, I was really kind of deep into my spiritual journey. I just finished up a 3-year shamanism program. I'd taken a number of energy healing, energy working classes. I've done everything from Reiki to you name it. I have experience in a lot of things, and I was getting a little frustrated because, as talented as people would tell me that I am, at energy type things and working with different modalities. Personally, I found that there were certain areas of my life that I just wasn't seeing the shifts going on that I really thought should be happening. And that's where Howard came in, because I really was kind of embracing this whole thing of forgiveness and starting to learn more and more about it. And and that's the way the journey goes. You start to put your energy in one direction, you start to open up doors, and as soon as you start like wondering about something, you stumble across a book, you stumble across a video like this, you hear my radio show, you find a website, you name it, you meet a person, and they they can unlock another door in a way, or indirectly or indirectly, they lead you to the next thing, Sometimes you meet people, like the reason I was in Kauai is because I had met somebody and we went to Kauai together, and that led me, to meeting Howard. So people come into our lives, and our lives are so intertwined, and it takes us down our journey. But getting back to his prayers, so we would talk about the forgiveness prayers, and I got to spend quite a bit of time with him. I was very fortunate. I was there for a month in the winter, and then another month in the summer. So I got to spend, a fair amount of time kind of picking his brain, which, is something I'll be eternally grateful for. But what I noticed in his prayers was there was a pattern, what appeared to me to be a pattern. And to illustrate the point, I'll read a prayer from one of his prayer programs. And don't get hung up on the word prayer. For a long time in my life, and I think I was starting down this path earlier, I had a real problem with the word prayer, the word God. I've never had a problem with the concept of that there's something larger than myself, that there's a divinity, to the universe, to life, to how our lives are. None of that has been a problem for me, but it might be for some of you, and it might not be for some of you. But the words God in prayer had some religious overtones to me that made me really uncomfortable with it. And me being a rebellious person, I avoided them like the plague. So if I use the words God in prayer, don't be offended by it. Just reframe it and use whatever word is comfortable for you, So divine light works great for me. Great spirit works great for me. Universe, you name it. Infinite creator, whatever it is, that you associate with the words. And if all of that doesn't sound good to you, it doesn't matter. It's all good. It really is. It's all good. Because there's a greater point that I'm trying to make here in how forgiveness works. So what I noticed in his prayers, and I'll use this one prayer, is he calls it his personal cleansing prayer. It's one of the shortest ones, and it's easy. And it goes, Divine light, please help me forgive all people. Help all people forgive me. Help us all forgive ourselves. Please, divine light. Thank you, divine light. Amen. Thank you, divine light. Amen. So there's it's a very short prayer, but there's a lot to it. So you got the please and thank you. You started off with please. That's humility. Humility, it's a wonderful thing to be humble. It's a wonderful thing to ask for something and say please, and to be grateful, to say thank you. It's just good energy to put out there. Whether you're talking to a friend, you're talking to your children, your loved one, your whatever. These are just great things to do. You don't have to be talking to the divine, to have humility and to have gratitude. But the other parts of the the actual prayer. And a prayer for me is a little different than an affirmation, although they appear to be very similar. An affirmation is, you're affirming something, you're saying something. I'm a nice person. I'm a nice person. I'm a nice person. Like I'm affirming it, and that's a great, wonderful thing to do. And I think we all should do that more. I know I should do that more. When we start to have our little monkey minds playing with all the things that are wrong in our lives and wrong with us, all we have to do is start saying things, our thoughts and our words and our actions. Those are each one of those three things are energies that we're putting out into the world. And our thoughts, that's the gift of being a conscious, awake person, is you can have control and choose what you think. And what you think affects what you say and what you do. And what you think affects how your brain is wired. The programs, like think of it as a computer program, the programs that are running into our head. What you think and say, you can change your program at any time. That's why an affirmation is so great. You're rewiring your brain to a new belief system or to a new thought pattern. A prayer is like an affirmation, except you're making a petition. You're putting something out there. You're asking something, or you're putting something out there to the universe or to God or to the divine, whatever your belief system, wherever you're coming from on that. Doesn't really matter. Doesn't matter to me. And in my relationship with the divine, it doesn't matter to the divine because there's no judgment there. But you're asking for something. So in a forgiveness prayer, you're asking for forgiveness. You're putting something out there. In this formula that I saw, that was kind of a theme in his prayers, and there's people all over the world that use his prayers and reference his prayers, and there's others as well that are great. But the first one, in that one that I read, was, please help me forgive all people. Or in the case of my mother, please help me forgive my mother, going back to my wanting to heal my relationship with my mother. Okay, so I acknowledge that the other person has done something that I need to forgive them for. That's pretty easy, right? The next line, please help the other person, help all people, help my mother forgive me. Okay, why on earth would I ask my mother to forgive me if she's the one that did something wrong? It's because now we're in the age where we want to become a little bit more aware and a little bit more enlightened, right? So we want to acknowledge that every relationship we have, everything that happens in our lives, good or bad, is a two-way thing. We're all connected. So whatever happened between me and my mother, it's a two-way street. And if we really want to release the energy, we really want to forgive and release, what's going on, and I think of it as energy, then what we really want to do is we want to have it released from both sides. And then we want to forgive ourselves. The last line, please help us all forgive ourselves. Please help my mother and I forgive ourselves. And that's the hard one, right? Because now, why do we have to forgive ourselves? If in the case where that's the other person that we think did something, we have to, we're asking to forgive ourselves for feeling weak, for feeling hurt, for getting upset that that the other person did that, for not being compassionate enough and accepting them, for we can go on and on and on. In the case where we did something, we're asking to forgive ourselves. It's like when we do something or say something mean to somebody, and it's always a great thing to apologize. Like, hey, I'm sorry I said that. I'm sorry I did that. I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry. I honor the light in me, honors the light in you. I apologize for whatever harm that I've caused. But don't ever forget, please don't forget to forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for what you do, because as long as you don't forgive yourself, you're holding yourself captive. and you're keeping yourself stuck in that energy. You got to let it go. It's all about releasing, right? So long story short, is that prayer. One time it was, it's going on 2 years ago now. I was driving, I was doing a 2-hour drive from my home on the coast of Massachusetts out to the western part of the state. And I was going out for a class, a weekend class. And on a Friday night, I decided I was going to try this prayer that I just read. And I did it while I was driving in the car, and it's a pretty quick prayer, so it was like, and, I'll say God because it's quicker. God, please help me forgive my mother. Help my mother forgive me. Help us both forgive ourselves. Please, God. Thank you, God. Amen. Thank you, God. Amen. Divine light, please help me forgive my mother. Help my mother forgive me. Help us both forgive ourselves. Please, God. Thank you, God. Amen. Thank you, Great Spirit. Amen. Over and over and over it did. I said it 1,500, 2,000 times in that car drive out on a Friday night. On Sunday night, I decided on the drive home I was going to call my mother, and I braced myself, for the, I was going to feel bad because I hadn't called in a little, it'd been a few weeks since I called, and usually, I had to hear about that, and then I had to hear about, this was wrong, and why wasn't I there to help, and, you name it. I just always, it didn't go well for me. And I called, and she was thrilled to hear from me. We talked for 5 or 10 minutes, and everything was great. And then I'm like, what's going on here? And then all of a sudden she starts sharing all these things, from her childhood and about my family, things about my grandparents and my aunts and uncles, things that had happened, when she was a child, and how my grandfather died when she was a teenager, and how traumatic that was for her. I mean, things that I'd never heard. I was 50 years old, and I'd never heard of it. And then afterwards, she tells me, she starts apologizing for sharing. And I assured her that it was all good, because I was actually very grateful to hear all the stuff that I didn't know about my family. And she goes on to tell me that she's never really shared that with anybody. She never shared it with my father. She never shared it with my, her second husband, my stepfather. She never shared it with her friends. She still hangs out with the same group of their women now, but girls, they all went to elementary school together back in the 1930s. None of them knew any of this stuff. Counselors, you name it. This is all stuff that she herself hadn't even remembered for years and years and years. And then all of a sudden she decides on that Sunday night to share it with her son, me. So we get off the phone, we talked for 30, 40 minutes, and it was beautiful. And at the end, I said, I love you. She said she loved me. I hadn't said I loved you to my mother in years, not because I didn't love her, just because I didn't. I just didn't say it. And now I say it every time I talk to her, every time I see her. And so but I was like, we get off the phone, and I was like, what the heck just happened? And then all of a sudden it occurred to me, I just did this forgiveness prayer asking to release the energy between me and my mother, like 1,500, 2,000 times. And yeah, sometimes I can be a little obsessive about things. Okay, forgive me for that. But so the point is, like, here I am. I'm somebody that, I have a 25-year background as an engineer. So sometimes it's nice to actually see hard evidence. And to me, that was hard evidence. After she's lived, at that point, 80 years of her life, she decides at 80 years old, she's going to share all these things that she hasn't shared with anybody in her life, much less thought of in decades, a lot of it, with her 50-year-old son. What are the odds that she shared it on that day? What changed? I said a bunch of forgiveness prayers. I put it out, that energy out to the universe to let that go. And I'll be honest with you, when I started doing that prayer, I really was perfectly happy being angry and hurt with my mother. I was perfectly happy. I just really wanted to be able to call her up and not feel so terrible when I got off the phone with her, not feel guilty, not feel whatever I was feeling. By the time I was done and arriving at my destination 2 hours later, I really meant it. I was like, please, please let me forgive my mother. Help me. I don't know how. Help me. Universe, help me. I'm asking you, I'm begging you, I'm praying to you, like, help me forgive my mother. Help my mother forgive me. I don't know how it's possible. I don't know how it works. I don't know if she wants to, but I'm asking for help. And help us both forgive ourselves. It's like, I don't want this just to be for me. I don't want myself to be free and for her to be miserable. I want us both to be free from this burden. And I meant it. Like, it was coming from the heart by the time I was done. And the reason I say that is it's a process. It's a process. And you just got to start. You got to start wherever you're at. Even if it seems the reasons don't seem that good, start. And then, that's my phone. And you'll just go from there, see where it goes. And I think we're going to be running out of time. Oh, we still got a few minutes left. But yeah, start from there and see where it goes. And think of it as energy. Think of things in terms, that you can get your head around. Like, I'm a very spiritual person, but I'm not a particularly organized religious person. So I have to think of these things in a way that resonates for me. And I would suggest you do the same. Look at think in your lives, like the drama triangle, like, think of areas of your life where you have relationships or things that are dysfunctional or things that have happened to you in your life, that you can't let go of, and start trying to reframe it. Think of it as energy. That's what helps me. If I think of something as energy, if somebody slaps me or, screams at me angrily, if I think of that person doing it, if I replay that memory over and over, guess what? I'm going to keep feeling the emotion over and over and over. If I can remove myself from that a little bit and say, okay, I want to let the energy go. Whatever was going on there, like, I'm not even going to think about who was right and wrong at this moment, but there was some bad energy going on there. What do I need to do to let go of that energy? I start to go through a process, to try to forgive, which forgive to me is release. Another great tool, since we have a few more minutes, another great forgiveness tool would be Ho'oponopono, which is another it's based on the Huna or Polynesian traditions, and it's actually very ancient. And it has a lot of similarities to the prayer that I read, in that they view everything, as if I have a problem, they would come in and they would say, okay, like, who else, like, let's look at the whole family, let's look at the whole community, like, let's look at this thing holistically and let that thing go. And if you're interested in Ho'oponopono, and there's a simple prayer that's actually known around the world. You can go pretty much anywhere in the world, and it's now becoming a known thing. There's a 4-line prayer, and it goes, I am sorry. Please forgive me. I love you. Thank you. And you would say that for any situation that, that you're feeling hurt or you want to shift the energy in. And I've taken classes on it. You can learn a lot more about it. There's a tremendous amount of depth in the tradition, in the process. And if you're interested, a great introductory book, if you're not familiar with it, is this one. It's called Ho'oponopono, The Hawaiian Forgiveness Ritual as the Key to Your Life's Fulfillment by Ulrich Dupree. You can get it on Amazon Prime. You can have it in your house in a couple days. And he does an excellent job. It's a very short book of just explaining, where the tradition came from, who modernized it. There was a beautiful woman, a Hawaiian woman, that modernized it in the 1970s and 80s and was really the one that brought it out to the world. And then Dr. Hugh Len, he became kind of the face of it. And there's been other people as well. But it's a beautiful thing. And I would encourage you, to explore it. And and this is why I think it's such a beautiful thing, because there's just a lot of depth to it. So it's, I'm sorry, and this is reading from the book, some of the depth. I apologize. I perceive that I suffer, and that connects me to my feelings. I no longer reject the problem, but recognize my learning task. I or my forebears with whom I am connected energetically, genetically, and by tradition as much as by history have caused harm. I know where I stand and I feel remorse. Just in that one line, I am sorry, they're talking about our family lineage, generations. They're talking about taking responsibility for our part in it. They're talking about being connected energetically as well as genetically. I mean, everything that we've talked about in close to an hour here, it's all covered in that one simple paragraph explaining one line in the Oponopono prayer. Please forgive me. Please forgive me for having, through myself or my forebears, consciously or unconsciously disturbed you and me in the course of our evolution. Please forgive me for having acted contrary to the divine laws of harmony and love. Please forgive me for having until now judged you or the situation, and in the past disregarded our spiritual identity and connectedness. So please forgive me, so there's a lot of depth there, and you don't have to start out there, but understand that you can really find your way into your heart, and through your heart into the heart of everyone around you, through saying simple things like, I'm sorry, please forgive me. And there's another important line in there. It says, consciously or unconsciously. So even if we're unconsciously, if we've hurt somebody unconsciously, we have to be aware that energetically there's still been harm done, and we need to release that. I love you. I love myself. I see and respect the divine in you. I love and accept the situation just as it is. I don't even need to add anything to that. And then thank you, gratitude. Thank you for I understand that the miracle is underway. I thank God and the angels for the transformation at my request. And it goes on a little bit from there, but I do want to wrap it up. But again, it's the energy, it's like, so thank you, because I know the transformation is underway. We put an energy out there. Every energy we put out there, good or bad. So take control of your thoughts. Take control of your words, because if you have negative thoughts, guess what? That's energy that's going out there. It's just a fact. It's just physics. It's just the way the universe works. So when you're putting a forgiveness, or you're asking for release, you're asking for love, you're putting that out there, and it's going to come into your life. You don't necessarily have control of when or where or how, but it's just the way the universe works. What you put out there is what you get back. So I hope you enjoy any and all of this. I hope you found something that was useful. Please contact me if you want to talk to me, if you want to work with me. You can go right to my website, www.loulessard.com, or you can email me directly at iamloulessard.com. And please, please listen to my radio show on the Dream Vision 7 radio network every Monday at 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. And there's a lot of wonderful shows on the Dream Vision 7 network. I encourage you to listen to as many as you can. Go check out the website. It's beautiful. It's Dream Visions, www.dreamvisions7, the number 7.com. And yeah, and if you're here, you know how to get there if you're watching this video. But anyway, thank you so much. Bless you all. Have a blessed rest of the day. Have a great holiday, and I hope to be talking to you soon. Bye-bye.